The night Lorelai Vance nearly lost her job was the same night she saved a Korean billionaire from signing the worst contract of her career. She didn't plan it. She never planned anything that happened in that private dining room at Carrington House, the kind of restaurant where the tablecloths cost more than her weekly paycheck and the candles were imported from a small batch chandler in Provence that most people had never heard of. She was just supposed to pour the water, clear the plates, and disappear the way a good server disappears. Present without being seen, efficient without being remembered. That was the job. That had been the job for 3 years. But then Chaeyoung Han set down her pen and looked at the contract in front of her with an expression that Lorelai recognized, not from any business school, not from any boardroom, but from her mother's face. That particular stillness, the kind that happens when someone is trying very hard to understand something that doesn't quite make sense and is too proud to say so out loud. Lorelai had seen that face 100 times. She knew exactly what came next. She stepped back into the shadows near the service corridor and kept her mouth shut. For now, the reservation had come in 6 days earlier, a party of 4 under the name Whitmore Acquisitions. The maitre d', a precise man named Dorian Fitch, who had been running the front of house at Carrington for 11 years, had flagged it immediately. One of the guests was Chaeyoung Han, the founder and majority shareholder of Hanwoo Group, a Seoul-based industrial conglomerate with a valuation that made most American companies look like corner stores. She was flying in specifically for this dinner. The deal on the table, a proposed merger with Whitmore Acquisitions, had been in negotiation for the better part of 8 months. Lorelai found this out because Dorian told the entire floor team at the pre-shift meeting, the way he always did when a table required elevated attention. He used the word discretion 4 times in 6 minutes. He made eye contact with everyone individually. He was not, he said, interested in any creative interpretations of that word. Lorelai nodded along with everyone else and thought about her mother's next oncology appointment, which was in 9 days and would cost, out of pocket, somewhere in the range of $400 after insurance. She thought about whether she could pick up a Saturday lunch shift without missing her brother Theo's soccer tournament in Hoboken. She thought about the water filter in the apartment that had been slowly dying for 3 weeks and the notice her landlord had slipped under the door about the building's annual inspection. She was not thinking about Chaeyoung Han. Then the party arrived, and everything changed. There were 4 of them. Lorelai watched from the host stand as Dorian led them through the main dining room toward the private section in the back. 2 men in front, Brennan Whitmore and his associate, a man introduced only as Clifford, who wore the particular expression of someone who had learned early in life that looking bored in expensive rooms made other people nervous. Whitmore himself was the opposite, loud in the way that certain confident men are loud, filling the space before he even sat down, laughing at something Clifford had said before they'd even reached the table. He had the handshake of a man who'd read 3 books about handshakes. Chaeyoung Han followed 2 steps behind, accompanied by a young woman, her executive assistant, it turned out, who moved with the quiet efficiency of someone paid to anticipate problems before they became problems. Chaeyoung herself was smaller than Lorelai had expected. 70 maybe, though the way she carried herself made the number feel irrelevant. Her suit was the color of charcoal, understated and perfect. She wore 1 ring. Her hair was silver and pulled back without fuss. She sat down and folded her hands on the table and looked at the room with the expression of someone who had sat in many rooms like this one and found them all, on balance, acceptable. Lorelai poured the water. Nobody looked at her. The first sign of trouble came 11 minutes into the meal, during the amuse-bouche course. Whitmore had handed Chaeyoung the contract, a 40-page document in a leather portfolio embossed with the Whitmore Acquisitions logo. With a kind of theatrical casualness, the way a magician sets up a trick. "We had our team go through it this morning," he said, gesturing loosely at Clifford. "Tightened up a few of the language points, nothing material. We're really just formalizing what we've already agreed on." The executive assistant, whose name was Jisoo, leaned over and translated. Chaeyoung listened, nodded once, accepted the portfolio. She didn't open it. Lorelai, collecting the empty amuse-bouche plates, clocked this. It was the kind of detail that most people would miss. The billionaire hadn't opened the contract, but Lorelai had spent 3 years watching how people behaved in expensive rooms under pressure, and she'd noticed that the most dangerous moments at any table were not the loud ones. They were the quiet ones, the pauses, the things people did with their hands when they weren't sure what to do with them. Chaeyoung set the portfolio beside her bread plate and asked Jisoo something in Korean. Jisoo answered. Whatever she said, it was brief. Chaeyoung nodded again and picked up her fork. Whitmore smiled and poured more wine. Lorelai had learned Korean the way she'd learned most things, out of necessity, and then out of love, and then in spite of everything that tried to get in the way. She'd been 20 when she enrolled at Columbia as a linguistics major, which her father called a beautiful way to be unemployed, and her professors called a genuinely rare aptitude. She'd had a plan. Finish her degree, go to graduate school, get fluent in 3 or 4 languages beyond the 2 she'd grown up speaking, do something. She was never quite sure what exactly, but something, with the particular way her brain seemed to reach for language the way other people's reached for music or math. Then her mother was diagnosed. The plan didn't disappear. It compressed. Lorelai took a leave absence in her junior year that turned into something longer. She picked up the serving job because the hours were flexible and the cash was fast, and Carrington House paid better than anywhere else she'd applied. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself that every time she put on the uniform. 3 years later, she was still saying it, but she'd kept studying Korean because a neighbor in her building, a woman named Mrs. Pak, who made kimchi in the hallway on weekends and was deeply unbothered by anyone's opinion about this, had offered to teach her in exchange for help with English paperwork. Mandarin because the restaurant's head chef was from Chengdu, and once, during a very slow Tuesday dinner service, had offhandedly said that no one in the front of house understood what he was actually saying to his cooks. Lorelai had smiled and responded in Mandarin. The chef had stared at her for a long time and then started leaving her the good staff meal. Languages were the one thing she hadn't given up. So when Chaeyoung Han murmured something to Jisoo during the salad course, something low and quick, not intended for the table, Lorelai understood every word. She said, the 3rd clause in the 2nd section. What does it say exactly? The one about the subsidiary rights, and Jisoo said, I haven't seen the full document yet, Chairwoman. They only sent it this morning. And Chaeyoung said, even quieter, then how are we supposed to sign it tonight? Lorelai set down the salad tongs very carefully and walked back to the service corridor. She pulled the portfolio off the side credenza during the entree course. This was, technically, within the scope of her job. Dorian had specifically instructed the floor team to ensure that any documents or personal items left on side surfaces be treated with care. She wasn't reading it. She was repositioning it. That's what she told herself. Then she opened it. The contract was dense, the kind of document that was designed to be dense. Long sentences, cross-references, defined terms that looped back on themselves in ways that required a law degree to fully untangle. Lorelai didn't have a law degree, but she'd taken 2 semesters of contract law at Columbia before her leave of absence, and she'd spent the last 3 years watching wealthy people use legal language like a magic trick, making things disappear in plain sight. She found the clause on page 23, Section 4, Paragraph 7b, in the event of dissolution or material restructuring of the acquired entity within the first 36 months post-execution, all intellectual property assets, including but not limited to registered patents, proprietary formulations, and pending applications, shall revert to Whitmore Acquisitions LLC at 0 consideration, irrespective of their assessed market value at the time of reversion. She read it twice. 0 consideration. That meant free. If Whitmore decided, for any reason, including reasons entirely within his own control, to restructure any part of Hanwoo's subsidiary operations within 3 years of signing, he could legally claim all of the subsidiary's intellectual property, the patents, the proprietary technology, everything that made the company worth acquiring in the first place. And it was buried on page 23 inside a numbered subclause beneath a heading that read Operational Continuity Provisions. Lorelai stood in the service corridor. For a moment, her heartbeat was very loud. She thought about Dorian's face when he said the word discretion. She thought about her uniform and the stack of medical invoices in the drawer of her kitchen table. She thought about how hard it was to find a job that paid this well and asked this little about your unfinished degree. Then she thought about Chaeyoung Han's hands, folded on the table, and the expression that looked like her mother's. She went back into the dining room. The signing was scheduled for after dessert. Whitmore had already ordered a celebratory bottle, Armand de Brignac, because of course he had, and was in the middle of what appeared to be a long anecdote about a golf game in Scottsdale. Clifford laughed at appropriate intervals. Jisoo was on her phone under the table, typing quickly. Chaeyoung was watching Whitmore the way people watch weather. Lorelai collected the dessert plates. She moved around the table slowly, the way Dorian had trained her, efficient, quiet, unobtrusive. She cleared Whitmore's side first, then Clifford's. When she reached Chaeyoung's place, she set down the dessert fork on the clean side of the plate and said quietly, in Korean, "I apologize for the interruption, Chairwoman. I don't normally do this, but I read the contract, and there's something in Section 4 I think your legal team should look at before you sign tonight." The table went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a pause in conversation. The other kind, the kind that has a shape to it. Whitmore looked at Lorelai the way he probably looked at things that weren't supposed to be there. "Excuse me," he said. His voice had dropped about half an octave. Chaeyoung raised one hand, a small gesture, barely a movement, and Whitmore stopped talking. She looked at Lorelai. Her expression hadn't changed exactly, but something behind it had shifted. "Continue," she said, in English, clear and deliberate. So Lorelai did. She explained the clause. She did it the way her contract law professor used to explain things, plainly, without drama, just the language and what it meant when you followed it to its logical end. 0 consideration, material restructuring, the timeline, the scope of what intellectual property assets covered under the existing definition in Section 1. She kept her voice level. She kept her eyes on Chaeyoung, not on Whitmore, who was doing something with his jaw that suggested he was working very hard not to say whatever he was thinking. "I could be misreading it," Lorelai said, "but I wanted to make sure you had the chance to check." Chaeyoung looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at the contract. She picked it up and opened it to page 23. Jisoo was already leaning over, reading. After about 30 seconds, Jisoo looked up at Whitmore with an expression that managed to be entirely polite and entirely devastating at the same time. Could you walk us through the intent of paragraph 7b? Jisoo said. Whitmore laughed. It was not a convincing laugh. It's a standard operational clause. It's in all our agreements. With zero consideration? Jisoo said, in the context of the broader, Mr. Whitmore. Chaeyoung's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. This meeting is over for this evening. What happened next took about 20 minutes and felt much longer. Whitmore tried twice more to reframe the clause. Clifford said almost nothing, which Lorelai took as evidence that he had known about it and was now running calculations about what his name on the document would have meant. Jisoo made 2 phone calls in rapid succession, stepping just outside the private dining room and returning each time with her face slightly more closed than before. Chaeyoung sat with her hands on the table and said very little. She didn't need to say much. The situation was explaining itself. Dorian appeared at the entrance to the private room at one point, drawn by some sixth sense he'd developed over 11 years of running difficult tables. He looked at Lorelai with an expression she couldn't fully read. She looked back at him. He withdrew. Whitmore and Clifford left without the signed contract. Whitmore's goodbye to Chaeyoung was stiff and very brief. He didn't look at Lorelai at all. Lorelai started collecting the champagne flutes, which had never been opened. She expected to be called into Dorian's office before the night was over. She was right. He was already there when she knocked, sitting behind his desk with the lamp on and his jacket off, looking like a man who had been doing a complicated math problem in his head for the last half hour and was now ready to discuss the answer. "Close the door," he said. She did. "Walk me through it," he said. She did. When she finished, Dorian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You understand that was an extraordinary breach of protocol. Yes, guests expect discretion. They do not expect our staff to read their private documents." "No, and they certainly don't expect to be addressed directly in the middle of a course." "No." Dorian looked at her. "She'd already ordered her car before you were done clearing the dessert plates," he said. "The tip she left for your section." He stopped. "It's sitting in an envelope at the host stand. I've never seen a number like that for a party of 4. Lorelai said nothing. "I'm not firing you," Dorian said. "I want to be clear about that, but I am going to need you to understand that I can't have this become a pattern." "It won't," Lorelai said. "It was a specific situation." "Every situation is specific," Dorian said. "That's how people end up in trouble." He paused. "Go home. Come back Thursday." She nodded and reached for the door. "Vance," he said. She turned. "She asked me your name." He looked down at his desk. "I gave it to her. I hope that was the right call." Lorelai stood there for a moment. "I think so," she said. She wasn't sure what she meant by that, but she meant something. The call came 4 days later, on a Wednesday, while Lorelai was eating a bowl of cereal at her kitchen table and looking at the water filter and wondering if the one at the hardware store on Amsterdam was on sale yet. The number was a New York City exchange she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. "Miss Vance?" said the voice. Young, professional, precise. "This is Jisoo Park, executive assistant to Chairwoman Chaeyoung Han. The chairwoman would like to meet with you at your earliest convenience. Would Thursday morning work?" Lorelai looked at her cereal. "What's the meeting about?" "I'll let the chairwoman explain," Jisoo said, "but she asked me to tell you, and I'm quoting directly here, that she's been looking for someone who reads contracts the way musicians read scores. She said you'd understand what that meant." Lorelai did understand. Her linguistics professor had said something almost exactly like that in her sophomore year about the difference between understanding a language and understanding what it was trying to do. She hadn't thought about that class in 2 years. "Thursday morning works," she said. The meeting was in a suite at the Baccarat Hotel on West 53rd Street. Jisoo met her in the lobby and brought her up in an elevator that opened directly into a sitting room where Chaeyoung Han was at a writing desk by the window, reading something in a document that looked nothing like a contract. A cup of tea sat beside her. She looked up when Lorelai came in. "Sit down," she said, not unkindly, the way people say it when they mean, "We're not doing formalities. There's no point." Lorelai sat. "You left Columbia," Chaeyoung said. "Junior year, linguistics. Before that, 2 semesters of contract law as an elective." Lorelai blinked, then caught herself. "Your team is thorough. They're paid to be." Chaeyoung set down whatever she was reading. "Your mother's treatment, is it ongoing?" "She's in remission," Lorelai said. The words still felt strange in her mouth, like something she wasn't allowed to say too confidently yet. "Since February." "Good," Chaeyoung said simply. No performance around it. Just good. She looked at Lorelai the way she'd looked at the contract on page 23, direct, without hurry. "I've been expanding my North American operations. I need someone in my office here who can read between lines in documents, in meetings, in conversations. Not just translate the words, but understand what's actually being said and what isn't." She paused. "Jisoo will send you the full job description. The salary is..." She said a number. Lorelai kept her expression even through a significant act of personal discipline. "I'd want you to finish your degree," Chaeyoung continued. "We'd accommodate the schedule. It matters to me that the people around me are working toward something." She paused again, almost imperceptibly, as if she was deciding whether to say the next part. "Whitmore's organization is currently under review by 3 separate parties who are now aware of his clause. That's not why I'm offering you this job, but I thought you should know it. How did they find out?" Lorelai asked. Chaeyoung looked at her with something that was almost a smile. "Someone read the contract," she said. Lorelai took the bus home the way she always did, through Midtown and up Amsterdam, past the hardware store where she still hadn't checked on the water filter. It was late October, and cold in the particular way that New York gets cold when it means it, the wind cutting across the crosswalks, and everyone on the street walking slightly faster than normal, chins down, hands in pockets. She thought about the job. She thought about finishing her degree. She thought about her mother, sitting in the oncology waiting room with a paperback novel, the way she always brought a paperback novel, the way she dog-eared the pages, even though Lorelai had given her a perfectly good bookmark 3 Christmases ago. She thought about how much of her life she'd spent making herself invisible in expensive rooms, and whether this was the thing that changed that, or just the next room, and whether there was actually a difference. She thought about Chaeyoung Han's hands on the contract and the way she'd raised one to stop Whitmore from talking, and how little effort that had taken. She got off 2 stops early and walked the rest of the way. The city was loud and cold and indifferent, the way it always was, and she walked through it thinking about all the things she'd kept. The languages, the incomplete degree, the habit of reading small print in situations where small print mattered, and how none of it had felt like an asset until someone had finally seen it that way. The water filter could wait another week. She had a call to return.